Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we're going to be kicking off the series where we are going to be showing you how to build a trading strategy using Python and more specifically leveraging the Python trading robot library. So let's get started. Alrighty, everyone. So first video, we're not doing any coding. We're going to just simply lay out the kind of project overview, just give a high level overview about what are we trying to do, what are some things that we're going to need to keep an eye out for, and then also provide you the 1,000-yard view. The 1,000-yard view is really just giving you an idea of what kind of services we're going to be leveraging from Azure and how do we kind of take this to the next level in the forms of hosting it on a website and things like that. All right, so first things first, when it comes to automated trading, there's a lot of things to it, but I will say this, there's a couple things that I want to highlight specifically when it comes to thinking about how do we build a trading robot and what are some of the common pitfalls that we might run into and where are some of the obstacles that we're going to be facing? Where are they in this process? So something that I found that was really helpful was defining the project requirements. And I tried to break them into 4 main categories. I'm not going to say this is an exhaustive list. I'm not going to say there's other things that you don't have to consider. But at least from my experience, these have been some of the main big categories where I notice most of the hiccups will happen or most of the complexity kind of enters the project. The first main bucket is really the data, right? So anytime you're building a trading robot, data should be first and foremost. If you don't have good data, I hate to tell you, it's going to be really challenging to make a reliable trading robot. And we will cover some challenges when it comes to data collection. So for example, just to kind of give you a preview, when working with the TD Ameritrade API specifically, you will find that in some cases, some of the instruments you want to trade, getting the data necessary to trade the way you want to is going to be quite challenging. And in some cases, it's just not going to be possible. Now, that doesn't mean basically trading that instrument is completely off the table, but it's going to require you to kind of expand your horizon in certain APIs that you might need to use. So you might not be able to rely entirely on the actual brokerage API in order to get the data you need. In some cases, you might have to expand outwards, and in some cases, even subscribe to other APIs in order to get that. Some common things that you need to think about is what is the data that you need to trade? You know, are you talking price data? Are you talking volume data? Are you talking news data? All of that information is really important because that's going to define what your data pipelines look like. So where is your data coming from and how do you go out and get it? And then more importantly, that kind of ties in, can you actually get access to the data that you need? So once you've defined the data you need, the question then becomes, can you access it? You know, if you can't access that data, how does that impact your trading strategy? Is there a way where you can get kind of 80% of the data and you're going to be fine? Or is this strategy so stringent where if you don't have 95% of the data you need, it's just not possible? Additionally, once you'll find you have the data, there's usually a cleanup process that comes along with it. The data is normally not in the fashion that you need it. And sometimes you're going to have to clean it up in order to get it ready to actually start the whole trading process. So those are just kind of things to think about in terms of the data aspect. Moving on to our next category, we're going to talk about signals. So signals to me are pretty important because naturally they're going to dictate what happens after those signals are generated, right? So this is really giving us a cue that we need to act in some fashion. In some cases, we might need to do things like order execution. In some cases, we might have to do things like rebalancing our portfolios, or we might have to close out all of our positions. So signals are really come in many different fashions. It can be anything from the time of day to certain indicators reaching certain values. In each one of those signals, we have to then define the flow of our process, right? So that signal is really kind of triggering a flow. And we have to then ask ourselves, what does that flow look like based on the signal that we were given? So when we think about signals, we first have to figure out ways, how do we identify them? So how is our code going to be able to identify those signals. And then we also have to write into our code what has to happen after those signals are generated. So it's not just necessarily identifying them, it's also identifying it and then defining what has to happen after the fact. This is where I tend to find people can sometimes become a little complex, because a lot of times their strategies might have 5 or 6, 7 signals in some cases. And the problem with that is you really have to ask yourself, is there ever going to be a situation where all of those signals are all happening at the same exact time? And so part of that is we have to also make sure that when we're defining our signals, that we're actually thinking about something that is possible to happen. I can make a trading strategy that relies on 90 different indicators. The problem is every single one of those indicators happening all at the same time could be very infrequent. In some cases, might not even happen. Another big topic we need to talk about is order execution. This is where things can really become complex, because depending on how your orders need to execute or defining what needs to happen once those orders have executed, that's where I've noticed that the code can become pretty complicated, because not only is it executing the order, but you might have to constantly be checking that order queue in order to make sure that the order was filled. And if it wasn't filled, in some cases, how does that impact your strategy? So a lot of times people will come out to me and they'll say, hey, I want to build a trading robot or something along that nature. And normally this is the part where things can become complex, because all of a sudden their strategy requires them to make sure their order is completely filled before moving on to the next step. So now all of a sudden your trading robot has to have this constant check. And there might be a drawback to doing that, right? So if you're constantly checking the queues, then how does that impact your other positions? Or, every time you go and submit your order, you have to modify it again, and you have to constantly readjust the price or something along that nature. In some cases, this is where you have to write, in some cases, 5 or 10 functions just to handle your one scenario. So you have to be really careful with this part, because in some cases, it can become very complicated really quickly when it comes to order execution. Now, a lot of times I'll be providing you templates. These aren't necessarily drawn in stone. It's not to say that's the one you're going to be submitting, but it's giving you a starting point, right? So a lot of the code that I'm providing you, it's not necessarily set in stone. It's written in such a way where it's giving you a template to start off of. And once you have that template, you can go and start modifying it. And then just thinking about, again, how do you track these orders if you need to do it? Another big thing is trading hours, right? So a lot of us might want to trade during different market hours, pre-market, post-market, or regular market. You really have to consider, how does that impact your data collection? Are you able to get the data you need during the different market periods? And more importantly, how does your strategy change depending on the type of market you're in, right? So if you're in post-market or pre-market, all of a sudden your market orders might no longer be possible. And so in a situation now, you have to have your code dynamically adjust based on the time of day to say, hey, we are now in pre or post market, so I don't have access to particular orders that I used to have. More importantly, you might want to also consider, how does the API change, right? So we've seen this especially with the Interactive Brokers API. That API can change dramatically compared to pre and post market. And in some cases during regular market hours, you can get vastly different data sent back to you compared to regular market hours. Even looking at the TD Ameritrade API, we've seen before that the streaming API, you're pretty much useless at that point. I mean, if you're talking in some cases during late in the evening, you really don't have access to those data streams like you do in the pre and the post market. So trading hours is a very big requirement that sometimes people don't think through, because they don't understand how the API is changing with regards to the hour of the day. Okay, so more on data. So again, just kind of reiterating this again, you need to really think through your data requirements and really understanding how are you going to go out and get the data you need. I can show you different ways to get data. I can show you different sources to get data, but really you have to ask yourself and say, what is the data I need and how is that going to impact my trading strategy? So for example, maybe I need my price data to be at a minute level data. Can you ensure that you're able to get that data? If you're not able to get that data, does your strategy even work? In some cases, I've seen some people try to go and get very specific type of volume data. And then they run into the challenge of, the APIs really don't offer that. And then they have to go explore other APIs. And then they find out that they might have to pay for those APIs. Does that impact your trading strategy? And then more importantly, do you have the capability to write that code in order to do it? I don't want this to be kind of a reason not to build a trading robot, but it's more, you got to think these stuff through. I don't want to be that person who's just sit there and say, oh yeah, you can do it, no problem. And there's no challenges along the way. This has just been from my experience working with other people and seeing the challenges that they faced, and more importantly, the challenges I faced. I faced some of these challenges as well. But if you can think through this beforehand, it gives you a nice direction on how to go about coding it. And more importantly, it's setting you up with the challenges that potentially you could be facing. So a lot of times you have to ask yourself, how flexible can you be with your data requirements? If you don't get all of it, does it dramatically impact the data, the performance of your trading robot? And a lot of times too, as I do ask that question, is it easier just to pay for your data stream? I know a lot of us, we want the free data, but sometimes if you pay for the higher quality data, it's going to really save you time down the road because you're spending less time writing code to clean it up. You're spending less time trying to work with 5 or 6 different data sources when all you have to do is just work with one. So you really have to consider that type of stuff when you're building your trading robot, especially if you're using it pretty frequently. To me, I think that's a well-earned trade-off. Okay, and then additionally too is a lot of people, when you go out and start building your robot, you really need to keep a couple things in mind: complexity versus the maintenance. The more complex your code becomes, the harder it's going to be to maintain, especially as a single individual. You really want to make sure that you keep code that you can easily maintain, and don't be afraid to sometimes think through a process before actually going through and writing the code, because a lot of times we might rush and go and write the code right away, but we haven't really thought through that process. Additionally, you might want to see if there's other ways to I'm trying to think of the way to say it. You might want to consider, are there other tactics that you can leverage in order to achieve the objective you want to achieve, right? So sometimes what I've seen people do is they focus on trying to write code that captures every possible scenario out there. And the problem with that is you're never going to be able to do it. You're going to always have scenarios at some point that throw your robot for a loop. I can just tell you that right now. There's many different market environments out there, and in each one of them can throw just a tiny subtlety with it, and that can all of a sudden throw your robot for a flip. Additionally, in those situations, sometimes it's better to think about what are your other tactics instead of just writing more code. So sometimes what you can do is, if you just have better risk management practices, you don't need to worry about those anomalies that might come down the road. In fact, in some cases, it's better to assume that they will happen, albeit infrequently, but that if that does happen, you're not going to be risking a ton of money on the table, right? So a lot of times, if it's something as simple as just making sure that when you take a position, it never exceeds a certain amount of your portfolio. What you've instead did there is you've kept your code where it's easy to maintain, but it's also able to handle those anomalies appropriately. So instead of trying to code for every possible anomaly, instead you're saying those anomalies are a reality. I can't avoid them all the time, but when they do happen, I know that I'm going to be in an okay position, and I'm not going to be completely thrown for a loop in a situation like that. So those are just some things that you need to think about when you're writing your robot. Again, I'm kind of providing you a template. You might have to change certain aspects of it, but when you start changing it, really start thinking through this. Sorry, I went for a run this morning, so now, of course, my throat, I have to constantly clear it. So, strategy overview. In this particular series, we're going to do a really simple strategy. This is probably like the hello world of trading. And really what we're going to be doing is the golden cross crossover. So this is leveraging the 50-day moving average crossing above the 200-day moving average. So this is a very bullish signal for a lot of traders. And so a lot of times when we see this type of phenomenon, the stock tends to move up. Now, with any type of indicator, it's never a guarantee, right? So we can never say every time this happens, it's always going to lead to a profitable move. However, when you look at the data, more often than not, you can argue that, yes, on average, this is something that tends to perform better when we see these type of signals. So it's never for sure, but a lot of times it could be indicative that maybe we are entering a very bullish market. So very simple strategy. I think that's why we want to start with this one, only because a lot of people, when they hear it, they can grasp what's going on. So this will be the strategy that we're going to start off with. We will explore other ones that include other indicators at different points in time. Some will be more complex than others. So when we get to those points, we will talk through some of the challenges that we have to go through. Additionally, in this particular strategy, we're going to make our orders relatively simple. So I'm not going to be including stop orders or limit orders or stuff like that. It's really just identifying a signal. Once you've identified that signal, can the robot do things like execute a trade? And then once it identifies an exit, that can exit that particular position as well. So very important that you take this into consideration when you're thinking through your strategy. Is sometimes it's better to start simple and then start adding different layers to it, because a lot of times it's more easier to wrap your head around, at least from my experience. So this will be our strategy overview. Is we're just going to be identifying signals where the 50-day moving average crosses above the 200-day moving average. Now, there are certain, I would say, twists to these ones. So some people use the EMA, some people use both SMAs for each one of them. Again, there's different interpretations to each. I think in this one, I think I have it just the SMAs, if I remember correctly. So we're going to be using that particular format. But, just keep in mind, some people will use EMA versus SMA and all sorts of different stuff. So just be aware of that. Okay. And then two more things. Probably the second to last thing is, especially when you're writing your code, don't be afraid to experiment. A lot of times your robot's not going to be working the first time around. That's expected. Just going with that expectation. You're going to have to experiment. Now, when you do experiment, like I tell everybody, you always want to use paper trading when possible. So if you don't require your strategy to actually trade live, I always try to use paper trading. Now, with the trading robot, when it does do paper trading, it's just basically keeping a log of it. So you have to keep in mind that it's not going to capture every possible reality of that trade. So it's not going to say, well, what was the actual fill price? I mean, I know I submitted it for that, but what was the actual fill price? The problem with the current trading robot is TD Ameritrade doesn't offer paper trading. Interactive Brokers does, but who is it? TD Ameritrade does not currently through their API. So we have to mimic paper trading. Now, in my particular video, I will actually be doing live trades. However, I'm doing it with very, very small positions with like $5 or $10 stocks. So I'm not taking very large positions. So this is stuff where, again, if it went completely south, I'm not going to be like broke at the end of the day. I'm trying to take it very, very delicately. So I'm not taking very large positions. I'm not getting into very high price stocks, because again, I'm experimenting with it. And I'm going in with that expectation that, yeah, maybe some of them don't go the way I want, but if they don't, that's fine. I'm not out a ton of money or anything like that. So this is a very important part. Do not put more money on the line than you can actually afford to put on the line. That's the biggest rule. I think anybody can relate to that. Don't be putting money that you can't lose on the line. And then, if possible, always use paper trading first with your trading robots. Never go live if there's a better alternative. So just keep that in mind when you're going through this. 1,000-yard view. Okay, so the trading strategy is really just one part of a much bigger picture for this entire series. What we're going to be doing is actually leveraging multiple different Azure services and showing you how to build basically an entire trading system. And what do I mean by like a trading system? Well, when I think about a trading system, we've seen with other series that we can leverage machine learning models to help us decide when to exit and enter positions. A lot of those models do require a significant amount of data. And so we'll have to leverage things like data pipelines and things like that to go out and fetch our data, clean up our data, and then putting it on a certain cadence for us. So that way we don't have to worry about maintaining this. We can kind of just set it up. As long as we set it up correctly, then we can put it on that automated schedule. And then when that data is put there, we can put it into our machine learning model. So we're going to be starting off leveraging the data pipeline service of Microsoft Azure. We'll then make sure that those data pipelines can connect to our machine learning model service inside of Azure. And then a lot of people want to be able to host their trading strategies. So that way they can run on a 24-hour cycle. So we'll also show you how to take your trading strategies and host it on an Azure web app. So what that will allow you to do is go to a URL where you can either do certain API calls. You can even do things like have a web page and have things like a dashboard where you can see how your robot is performing from anywhere in the world as long as you have an internet connection. So that's really the whole purpose of the web apps and the dashboards. Is those are kind of 1 and 2. I'm sorry. Those are kind of basically the same thing, but really the web app is the back end. So making sure that the infrastructure is there. Once you have the infrastructure, you're probably going to want to be able to have a dashboard where you can see your trades, see your performance and things like that. So that's really the 1,000-yard view. Is, the strategy is really kind of just kicking it all off. But at different points in time over a few months, we'll start integrating the strategy into Azure services. So that way you can create an entire trading system, something where, you can leverage machine learning models, you can leverage data pipelines, have them talk together, and then being able to run it from anywhere you want. And then maybe at different points, we'll see how we can integrate it maybe into other applications or other Azure services. But for right now, this is kind of the 1,000-yard view. All righty. Oh, God, that was good. Okay, so we are done with this video. Next video, we are going to be showing you how to clone the trading robot repo as it currently stands. The latest version is not currently on PyPy. I will be uploading the current version relatively soon, but until then, I also want you guys to understand how to clone the repo. Again, there's going to be constant changes, and the changes I post to GitHub aren't going to always necessarily be on PyPy yet. So if you always want the latest and greatest, then what you're going to have to do is be able to clone the repo to your local system at any given point in time. So in our next video, we're going to show you how to clone the repo, clone it so that way we can get things set up, and then we'll start writing the script for our very simple strategy. At this point, if you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and then turn on the little bell notification if you want notifications every time I upload a video. And then also make sure to follow my GitHub page. There's a link down below, and same with the Facebook page if you want to just kind of, again, stay up to date with content that I am releasing. But other than that, thanks again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.